Hey guys, happy Friday. Time for episode 4 of the Iron and Anchor podcast. Today we have Don Reinert, a super good friend of ours, a super stand-up guy in our church. We're excited to get to know him, his story, and to see what he can offer us as far as men living godly lives today. Hey Don.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Good. So we just had a conversation about your coffee, and it's making me a little jealous because I left my coffee at home, and but I'll be okay.
Age does that for you. You know, you learn to do things like that. Make sure you're keeping things where they need to be.
But I thought age may make you forget that, like, where's my coffee?
I'm not that old yet.
Come on. So Don, I've known you for we're sitting at a year now that my wife and I have started coming to FCF, and actually we started coming to your house to the Sunday night Bible studies first.
Correct.
And in that year, I've gained a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom from you, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And I think you have a lot to offer some young men like myself and like Jake. And like others out there, even some of the middle-aged men. Do I count as middle-aged now?
I think
like
you do.
41 is that middle-aged?
I think you're there. Yeah.
Oh, man.
There's a whole slew of age group. I mean, all the way from what's our youngest? I mean, 1 all the way to the top.
Yeah, and that's a cool thing about our church
It's nice.
is we have such a wide age group that are interacting together in a very intimate way. So we're going to get to know you today. We're going to talk about your story a little bit, and hopefully we're going to, share a little wisdom and share a little insight into, for me, what I got out of reading your story is, how we can still come back to restoration in the midst of a life that's not necessarily given up to God. So let's start out. You grew up in a large household, didn't you?
I did. It was a Catholic family. My parents had 9 children. That's not counting miscarriages. Those were alive while I was growing up. Mom was very talented. She had boy, girl, all the way down.
Wow.
Yeah.
Literally boy, girl.
Literally.
Wow.
And the oldest is 8 years older than me, and the youngest is 10 years younger than me.
So all real close.
Every couple of years we were basically having children.
Man. And you grew up in a small house, didn't you?
We had 3 bedrooms. When all of the boys were home and all of us were there, I normally would sleep on the living room floor.
Wow.
Because, we had twin beds, or double beds rather, and 2 double beds in the boys' room, and, 5 guys, and that doesn't work out. So it was just easier to sleep on the living room floor.
So were you raised Catholic?
I was raised Catholic.
So christened and that whole thing?
All of that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to skip the childhood because we know you grew up in a big family.
Kentucky.
Raised Catholic.
Yeah,
Kentucky. What part of Kentucky?
Northern Kentucky.
Okay.
In a small town called Melbourne.
Is that close to like Florence or anything like that?
Do you know where Coney Island is?
Yeah.
It's across the river
Right
from there and
okay.
4 miles east of there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. What did your parents do?
My dad was actually a carpenter. So
Okay.
he built custom homes, but then in order to raise extra money, he ran a cabinet shop in the basement as well. So he would make custom cabinets.
Is that where you
sometimes
learned
furniture.
all your skills?
I certainly learned a lot from my father, that's for
right.
sure.
I know you're the go-to guy, like when, something needs to be built or finished. And
Yeah, and I've done a lot of work myself too. Like, It's funny, my dad was one, though, he was a carpenter, so he would strictly work on carpentry. Mm-hmm. He would never try to hang drywall, for instance. Well, over the years, I've had needs for hanging drywall, so I've just tried it and done it. And
you love to paint, don't you?
And I enjoy painting.
Wow. I don't get that.
Don,
I painted a lot of walls, and it's like
Don's our
the
go-to
worst.
guy when it comes to when we bought our house. Don came over, and him and his wife Elaine painted every wall, painted the ceiling. Anytime there's any stuff that needs done, they're our go-to.
Yeah. Well, that's a nice servant heart.
It's easy to do, and it's neat because you see the results very quickly.
Right.
That's true. That's true.
So
Okay, so childhood, and you're raised Catholic, and then you're in high school.
yeah, in high school, and when I was in the third grade in grade school, I had a nun who I just admired. She was elderly, she was sickly, she needed help being taken across the street or across the parking lot to the church whenever we would go to church. And in the third grade, I would often help her. So I kept in touch with her after she retired, and she eventually died. I was there for her funeral and everything else, but I watched her life, and I was admired. I would just admired her and her dedication, and I wanted to be what she was.
So you made a statement you wanted to be a brother.
Yes,
And
and a lot of people don't know what that is, but a brother is like a nun. A priest is one that will say mass and do the communion, do the Eucharist and all that. Brothers do not. Brothers are more like nuns, where they give a life to Christ. They're supposed to dedicate their life to the church and to God. They will not. They'll have no sex. So chastity is one of the things that they have. But instead of performing mass, for instance, they don't do that. So they live a life of service. I had expected I probably would be a carpenter and would be building schools and churches and things along the way, but I was planning on dedicating my life.
And so you went to seminary.
And finally, in my junior year in high school, I had the opportunity to go to seminary.
So not after high school, but during high school.
During high school, yes.
Where did you go to seminary? Where was this
It
at?
was in Monroe, Virginia. It was called Father Judge Missionary Seminary. It's shut down now, and actually the place now is owned by the government, and it's got security guards and everything else in front of it. It's like, I used to live there. But
Really?
yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah, interesting.
Huh. So in seminary, you said you had a moment of seeing, like, you wanted to go to serve, you wanted to go to become a better servant, but you had a time there where that kind of got the brakes put on it because you started seeing some things in the seminary. And we're not here to, disparage, the church or anything like that. But for you personally, what was that made you kind of take a little fork in the road from there?
I just saw a lot of hypocrisy. I saw abuses of nuns being in priest and brothers' rooms way too late at night, early morning hours. I just, it's funny. One of the things we were supposed to do is take a vow of poverty, which basically means we don't own anything and we live a life that should reflect poverty and, reflect not worldly things. But it was so funny. I had worked 2 summers in order to pay my way to be there. And I get there, and the lavish lifestyle that they were living was just off the charts. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. I grew up in basically a fairly modest family. Obviously with 9 kids growing up in a 3-bedroom home, I wasn't used to a lot of lavish things. It was just shocking to me to see the extravagance that went on there in the seminary.
So when you made that decision to kind of go the other way, what were you thinking your life then was going to be? Your life goal was going to be?
Good question, because I can remember thinking that, wow, so I've reached this point in my life because I've just always believed what they told me I was supposed to believe. And now what I realize is all this stuff that I believed is not true. And I remember making the decision, I will start living my life with, now I'm only going to believe what I see, and I'm only going to believe what I experience. I'm not going to take anybody's word for anything any longer. My goal at that point in life really was just to be wealthy and to be successful in worldly terms.
Gotcha. So in that, obviously I think that pulled you away from God, or were you in the midst of that still recognizing him and giving him credit, or because you wanted to do it on your terms and from what you see and from what, I guess gather and bring into yourself, what was your relationship with God? Because that's a big change to go from being raised Catholic, going to seminary, and then taking that fork. It's
a huge change, and I can remember actually saying to him, if you exist, I don't know who you are. You're going to have to reveal yourself to me. And I live my life as if I did not believe that he existed.
Did he ever? We'll get there in a second, but so I identify with that a lot, because in my story, I had a life of knowing who God was and serving God and doing things, but still choosing to have God and sin both. Try to have God and sin both. Now as a redeemed believer, I know that, well, you can't have both. You can't have both. What were the effects of that in your life? And we can go on up to your marriage and those things, but did you recognize the effects of having that thought process in your life, or was it just these things happen?
Yeah. So the first thing was that I obviously, once you make that decision, you stop living with a moral guide, moral compass, if you will. The guidepost, or the things that would normally lead you down a path and keep you from falling off of the edge, you just removed. And so that was certainly true in my life. So I can remember I got back in my senior year in high school. I ended up not needing the credits and things to graduate. I just had 2 classes I had to get. So I ended up working 45 hours a week my senior year in high school. And I went a couple hours a day to school, and that was it. I started dating at shortly after high school, though. The girl I was dating, she ended up getting pregnant. She chose to have an abortion, and this is just an example of the kinds of things that happen in your life. Because you don't have the moral compass, you do things you should not be doing. And something as terrible as having an abortion. So when you look at it, yes, I'm guilty of murdering my own child. You go through life without God. You don't necessarily at the moment put your finger on that this is all happening because of your relationship or lack of relationship with God.
Right.
But you're doing things and things are happening that should not be happening in your life. You're on a path that's not good. You're on a path that's destructive. But you also tend not to do anything about it.
Yeah. For me, the thing that God was trying to use to get my attention, and for some reason, and my wife Lisa will attest to this, was cars. Like in the time of my addiction and alcoholism, I went through cars like nobody's business. I had them repoed. I had them wrecked. It was just a thing. But looking back at it now, I can see the minute that car, something happened with that, God was saying, come on, here's another chance. Here's another opportunity, and I was just so inward looking at myself and trying to, figure it out on my own, that I didn't see that. And I'm thankful that we have a God that can, shows us those things and tries to draw us in, if we're, but just looking at him, so you're going through life, you're working, you're having relationships, and you're becoming successful, correct?
Correct.
When is it that God shows you and points you back to him, and why do you think that you got to that place?
Yeah, so I ended up marrying the woman that I had fathered a child with when I was 18. We ended up staying married for about 2.5 years together. She ended up getting pregnant again and wanted another abortion, to which I said, no. If you're going to do that, I'm going to divorce you on the spot. I'm done. And she ended up miscarrying the baby. I have my own beliefs about how that all happened. But anyway, she miscarried the baby. And a few months after that, basically, that was the end of our relationship. And if you will, I moved on in my life. But I, at that time as well, I had been working full-time during the day. I had a part-time job on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays for a while. And then I also was going to school full-time at night. So again, very dedicated, very determined to accomplish and to achieve the goals that I set for myself. And all those things were all working along very well. I finally graduated from college, started a new job.
I just have a thought. I want to. Do you think that you were working so hard because you to achieve and to be successful is because you gave God his opportunity and he did not come through? Like in what you wanted to do, what you felt like you needed to do, be as far as a in service and in seminary?
Without God, you're not happy.
Yeah.
Amen.
Okay. And what you're doing is you're living a life looking for something to replace that emptiness. And so at the time it was like, if I'm wealthy, if I've got all kinds of money, if I'm successful, I'll be happy.
Yeah.
Doesn't work, but I mean, that was the goal. That was the thing that was driving me.
Right.
And it's funny when I look at my life. I've become very successful. And I think in many ways, God will look at us, and if we've got any tenderness at all at some point in our life, and we've tried to have a relationship with him, which is what I feel I had in my situation, I think he looked at me as a child and realized, okay, there's something redeemable in this kid. And even though I had rejected him, which unfortunately at some point all of us do.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I had rejected him, but he did not give up on me. And I think what he did is he allowed me to have the success that I thought would make me happy to prove to me that it would not.
Okay. So in that, when did he make that change for you? When did that heart change happen to you to say, okay, I see I have this, I have what I need and what I need to sustain myself, and but there's something missing. When did that happen?
So a couple things happened. One is I'll never forget when I was still very young and had made the decision I wasn't going to go to church anymore. I had a cousin of my dad's I went and visited her. She had children my age, and we were talking, and I'll never forget she made this statement. Well, Don, I just hope that if you realize at some point in your life that you've made a mistake, that you have enough courage to do something about it. And it's funny, people in your life will say things, and they may not even know what kind of a seed they planted. But in her case, her words planted a seed, and they just haunted me, if you would.
Yeah.
I mean, they stayed with me. So anyway, having gone through a divorce, I ended up buying my first house. I'm in the process of remodeling it. I'm going to use the skills that I've got in remodeling. And I'm sleeping one night, and about 3:15 in the morning, I hear noise. I wake up, and I hear somebody running up my steps. And from my bed, I can look out and see the steps and the landing, and then it turns and comes up finally the rest of the way, and I can't see anymore. But I saw a young man and a young woman running up my steps. And they turned the corner, came past where I could no longer see them any longer, and everything went quiet, and the entire house was black, just as dark as can be. It's 3:15 in the morning. And I remember thinking, oh, whatever, exclamation point. This place is haunted, and I don't even believe in ghosts and spirits. In my own opinion, God, he has said, blessed are those who believe and who have not seen.
Right.
But in my case, I was not going to believe in a spiritual world unless I saw.
Yeah.
And so he gave me what I needed to wake me up and make me realize I didn't have all the answers. So I sat there at that point and just struggled with it. And for about 9 months, I kept trying to rationalize it,
Right.
put it away somewhere. I mean, I had people would argue with me, how do you explain creation? And I had all the answers. I had pat answers I had come up with over the years of explaining everything away. Well, this was one I couldn't explain away. And I was working with a gal who was married and a Christian, professed to be a Christian, and she gave me a book. And it was called Angels on Assignment. It was written by a pastor named Roland Buck. And about 2/3 of the way through the book, he actually described what the angels looked like. And he claimed he had met Gabriel. He had met several of the others. They would sometimes meet him in the middle of the night. Gabriel, he said, was so big that when he would stand on the floor, if he lifted his head all the way up, it would go through the ceiling. He was like over 9 feet tall. But he at one point also made a comment, and I remember I'd never read the Bible, so I didn't know the significance of this, but he had made the comment that he could always tell how recently they had been in Jesus' presence, because when they had been in his presence, they glowed much more intensely than when they had been gone a while. And of course, I think about Moses and putting a veil over his face because he had been in the presence of God, and for a long time he'd kept the veil on his face, even though he didn't need it any longer because he didn't want people to know that glory had gone away. But so he described that with the angels, and then what he also described though was that they were somewhat semi-transparent. They would wear normal clothes. They talked and looked just like normal people. It's just that they glowed from within and they were somewhat semi-transparent. Well, that's exactly what I saw in my house.
So it clicked when you read that.
When I read it, I mean, even now I've got goosebumps just even thinking about it because of that whole experience. And so I suddenly was at a point in my life where, wow, I've been living the last few years of my life for the last, if you will, 7 years of my life, and I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. And there really must be a God. There really is a spiritual world. Wow, I don't know him. I need to find him.
Yeah.
And so that started my journey. I went to several different churches, and I reasoned, right or wrong, but I reasoned that almost every church I knew used the Bible in some fashion for its basis of belief. So I reasoned that the answer's got to be in the Bible. It's got to be there somewhere. And so I would go to different churches, and as soon as I found that there was a passage in the Bible that they didn't give a good answer for when I asked a question about it, I was pretty turned off by it. And God has blessed me with a critical, analytical mind. And I can remember thinking that, God, you're going to have to deal with me with some intellect. You just can't expect me to accept you purely on emotion. I have no problem with the emotion, but I need more than just emotion. And so when I would go to churches and they would not deal with a scripture correctly, I just was like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. And I immediately would pull away from that organization. One church, for instance, I went to pretty much dismissed the entire Old Testament, said it's not applicable. Yeah. Well, I don't know about you, but I've looked at my Bible, and the Old Testament's bigger than the New Testament. And we're just going to throw that all away, that there's no wisdom in there, there's no value in there.
Right.
I mean, those were the kinds of things that I would get into. But one thing led to another. I ended up getting married again. We ended up moving. I got promoted, and we ended up moving from Hamilton, Ohio area where I lived at that time up to West Nyack, New York. I actually lived in New City, New York, which is 30 miles out of Manhattan. We lived there for only 8 months. Right after we got there, I had bought a house to flip, and did quite well on that. It was kind of neat, though. But think about it, in 1986, you weren't seeing the flip shows on TV.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I was 1986, and I did my first real house flip. The first one I bought, I didn't even count because I didn't do that much to it. But the one in New York, it was significant. I ripped it apart, put it back together again pretty much. But we ended up leaving there and went to Pensacola, Florida, worked there for 22 months, and then eventually came back to Hamilton, Ohio. But while I was in Pensacola, Florida, I had a young man that was in my organization who just was so outspoken. He actually had the nerve to come up to me one day, and he said, Don, the world looks at you and you've got the world by the tail. You have a great job. You have a great education. You've got a beautiful wife. You got a beautiful home. I mean, that was one of the Prada homes, and it was just beautiful. And he said, you nice vehicles. I mean, you got the world by the tail. And you're miserable. You need the Lord.
Did you know you were miserable?
Oh, I did, but I didn't realize that anybody else could see it.
Him noticing that kind of struck you.
Oh, it was like he read my mail. I mean, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I thought I was putting on a good facade. And suddenly, and what was happening, for instance, in my home, my marriage was really struggling already. Again, the moves were not good for us. We had drawn apart. There was so much stress in just all those moves. And then the job I had was stressful on top of that. But things did not go well, and we were basically drifting apart. And I can remember just, okay, Lord, I'll go to his church and see what it's like. I need something because my marriage is falling apart. I need help.
Did your wife go with you?
No, she did not. At one point she did, but she didn't stay with it for very long at all. But that's another story for another time. But
Another episode.
another episode, yeah. But I'll never forget going there, and it was the first time I was ever in an apostolic church, first time I was ever in a Pentecostal church. And I can remember there was the first time I was there, I can remember there was a prayer time after the service. And there was a young teenage girl on the side, and she was praying. She was crying, had her hands raised in the air, her eyes closed, but just crying and just, reaching out to God, speaking in tongues. And it's a totally new experience. I'd never seen anything like this before. And I got near her, and I can remember just the hairs on my arms just stood up. It was like static electricity just completely around her. It was the Holy Ghost. I mean, he was there just in an overwhelming sense and an overwhelming presence. I had never felt anything like that before in my entire life.
That experience was...
Yeah, just totally blown away by it. And, then I can remember going and I, the preaching they were doing just made me realize what a scoundrel I was and just how bad I was. And I decided to do something about it, kept going. And I can remember at one point I was driving home from work one day and I didn't understand. I don't understand God at times. And I was really struggling with him. He can speak the world into existence. That means he could speak me to become perfect. In a single word, I could be whole, never sinning again, never having issues. Why doesn't he do it? I want to be perfect. I want to be the saint he wants me to be. Lord, you have the power to do it. Why don't you do it? And I'm just earnestly praying this driving home from work one afternoon. And I heard him speak audibly to me, Proverbs 3:12. I was totally blown away by it. I'll turn around in the truck looking to see who spoke at first.
Do you have it memorized?
It's for whom the Lord chastiseth or corrects, depending upon your translation, he loves. The same, the Father, the Son, in whom he delights in. And I had to think about that. It's like, wait a minute, you're sitting here telling me that I go to church and you basically fillet me with the messages all the time and just, peel me open and let me see all of my issues. But you continue to do that because you love me. And this is your way of showing me you love me. It's just, just totally blown away.
There's power in that. Yeah.
Yes, there is. And that's a passage that if you go through the Bible, you'll find in many other places as well. It's throughout there. But so yes, he corrects us. Yeah. And he chastises us because we make mistakes, but it's his way of saying, I still love you.
Right. The vine dresser, the vine dresser, he prunes the vine. He's causing that new growth by showing us where there's dead growth. Yeah.
When he stops doing it is when we need to be worried.
Right. So your story, I'm going to jump pretty far ahead to actually kind of now because I think we have an idea of, the man that God has, what it took to get you to this point. And there's some other things that, God's done for you as far as that marriage failed and you've met the lovely Elaine,
Yes.
now who we all dearly love as well. And you guys are you are a backbone and a shining example of marriage and what that can be to the young couples in our church, and that is just to be able to see. I mean, I don't think we've ever had a worship service without both of your hands. You only lift up one hand, each of you, because the other one is wrapped around the other one. And I mean, it's great. There is the love and the affection, but foremost, what you see first, and I think the other is a byproduct of it. Is you see your love of God and what He's done for you, and I think we see that first, and then as a byproduct of that, we see this great love and affection for each other.
He has forgiven so much. I mean, the mistakes we make, the mistakes I've made, are just horrendous throughout my life. And I would love to tell you that when I finally made the decision to serve Him, I served Him faithfully the rest of my life. Well, that's not true either.
Yeah.
But what I find is that the absolute constant thing about Him is His mercy and His love never ends.
Absolutely.
So in spite of the mistakes we make, in spite of just disappointing Him over and over again, I can't imagine Him being our Father and thinking about the mistakes we make. When I look at my own, I have stepchildren now, when I look at them and when they're making mistakes, I just sometimes just pull my hair out trying to figure out, what do I need to say to them? How do I get their attention? And many times I realize, in the same way, God does not force His will on us. He has it out there. He knocks at the door, but it's up to us to answer.
Yeah.
So in the same way, I end up having to do that with my stepchildren. I can't force my will upon them, and yet it doesn't change that I still love them. And when I think about His ability to love, that's just incredible to me. I've been very fortunate in times when I've made mistakes. I've had people around me, I've had pastors that, rather than looking to condemn, they looked to restore.
Right.
And I can remember at times, I'll never forget one time I was going through a situation and they asked if I had been restored yet. And I go, no, and I'm not even sure I want to yet. And they were like, oh, this is really bad. I was like, yeah, it was. But, they stayed with me and let God deal with me. And in time, the restoration took place.
Yeah. So you and Elaine work together. You do some financial counseling, and you're actually currently doing that with Jake and I's lives, and doing wonderful things and speaking great wisdom to us. And one thing that I think you have to offer, and I want to ask, is living your life and as much as you've lived so far and the things that you've gone through. What would you say to young men, in their 20s, in their 30s, that know who God is, but are seeking other things, that are trying to find other outlets to make them who they are? What would you say to them? What advice would you give to help, keep them on the correct, quote unquote path? Because I think it didn't necessarily go, the path was not straight for you. And it's not straight for a lot of us, but I think, you have the added aspect of being able to look in the rearview mirror and say, okay, well, if I would have done that, or if I would have heeded that, or, such and such, what would you say? What advice could you give?
Okay. So the first one is that, if you truly believe that He is God, then deep down inside you have to recognize that He knows what is better for you, better than you know yourself.
That's a struggle.
It is a struggle, but do you really think you have infinite wisdom and you know what's best? And the answer is, if you really sit and analyze that, the answer is no, you're guessing.
Yeah. But everything in the world, everything we see on TV, everything we see in social media tells us the opposite.
Correct. And so part of that, you have to recognize, yes, we are in this world, but we're not supposed to be part of it.
Do you think a man that is standing out on his own, so to speak, and trying to make his way, and then a man over here that's trying to do the same thing. So this man over here is on this island, and he's trying to make his own way. He's trying to do his own thing, and seek, whatever he thinks is best. The man over on this island, he's trying to do the same thing, yet he has people and community around him, and most of those people and community around him know the Lord, know God. Who do you think stands a better chance of heeding that?
Yeah, there's no doubt, the one in the community. It's funny. I've talked to many people about going to church, for instance, and you talk about going to church. Well, why do we go to church? I mean, why do we go?
Well,
And some people say, well, we go to worship God. And that's true, we do. That's not the only reason why we go. And then some people say, well, we go to be fed. Well, yeah, that's true. That's another reason. But there is another reason why we go that a lot of people totally miss. We are going to support one another.
Yep.
We're going to be the help to one another, to lift up one another, to, when one has fallen, to restore that person, to give encouragement, words of encouragement.
Yeah.
We often think that it's all just spiritual, but what we fail to realize is that our physical lives are based on our spiritual life as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the way we end up living our physical life is very much determined by things that are going on spiritually.
And I've harped on it in the last 3 episodes about community and about, the importance of that and being part of something that's, bigger than yourself, because there's those opportunities. If you're not there, somebody's going to say, where are you? If you're, doing, like the gentleman that came up to you and said, you're miserable, there's the opportunities for you to say, man, they're not acting the same. There's something going on. Let's find out why.
People notice because they care.
Right.
Because they care, exactly.
Right. So that's, man, I can't say that enough on this podcast. Is community is so important, because community is also family. You think of the new heaven and the new earth, man, we're all in this together. We're all in one big community, one big family. And we're going to be sitting down to dinner and eating and praising God all at the same, table. So why not do it now?
Well, the other thing that comes into play is, I think when it's all said and done, every one of us, I think we want to be loved.
Yeah.
We're born with a desire to be loved, and we start living life, and as we get older, we question whether people love us. And
Absolutely.
so ultimately, we're all looking to be loved. So when you really think about it, there is no one who's going to love you more than the Lord. So that's a huge thing that we've just got to keep in our forefront. I mean, we cannot let go of that.
And God knows that we want that, because he commands us to love thy neighbor as yourself.
And when our church body is doing what it's supposed to be doing and living the way it's supposed to as well, that's exactly what ends up happening.
Absolutely.
The community on its own isn't effective unless it's driven by that love. So when you look at it, yes, we all want love, and God gives the love, but he also gives us brothers and sisters in the church for that love as well.
Yeah.
Love, if I tell you I love you and never do a thing for you, it's pretty empty words.
Absolutely. Yeah. Man.
But when I tell you I love you and I do things for you and I support you, and I may be doing things for you that you don't even know, I may just be praying for you. Sometimes God has revealed things to people. Sometimes he's revealed them to me. But, sometimes he'll just put somebody on my mind to pray for. And there have been times when he's done that. I've actually picked up the phone after a couple of days, called the person, and only found out at that point that, oh my God, they were going through just a horrible situation. And everything turned out good. But it was because they had so many people praying for them.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely something that I would give advice to other men. The other thing that I give advice to is, our lives will turn, they'll take twists. And there are times when we really don't understand why. And it's not what our choice would be. But what we also have to remember is that he is sovereign. And if he is our God, but also our Lord, he's our Savior, but also our Lord, that means I give him the permission to rule my life. And when I really do that, then hardships may come, diseases may come, even death of this body will eventually come. But he knows what's better for me than I know what I need myself.
Yeah.
And if I can just have enough faith in him, and faith is an interesting thing. It's not my faith that matters.
Right.
It's the object of what I put my faith in that matters. And sometimes we lose sight of that. We get frustrated because maybe God doesn't act quick enough for us.
Yeah, I struggle with that. I have struggled with that is that, well, I think my faith is not strong enough. I think that, man, I'm just not believing hard enough that this is going to happen. But you're right. It's not my faith. It's the object of the faith.
I often through life I've gone and I've asked God for something, and it's really easy when I ask him for something and he says yes and he gives it to me. That's really cool, right? We all handle that really well.
Yeah.
Amen.
It's funny. I'm actually okay when I pray for something and ask for something and God says no. I'm okay with that too, because he really knows what's better. The one I struggle with is when I get no answer. He's basically saying wait.
Yeah.
I hate waiting. And it's funny. I joke with people. I never pray for patience because the Bible says you learn patience through trial and tribulation.
Right.
I don't need any more. So, but it is something I think we all struggle with. We are all wanting instantaneous answers. We live in a society where everything is supposed to be happening right now. Mm-hmm. There's no patience ever communicated. We're basically told, go grab it, get it right now. But God doesn't work that way. Yeah. And often the only way we can develop as a person is to be in a situation that's not comfortable for us.
Right.
He is more concerned about character than comfort. Mm. He has absolutely no problem putting us in situations that are very difficult for us to go through. If in the long run, and he knows this, but in the long run, it ends up changing our character and we become a better Christian and a better man because of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had a friend of mine tell me when I was out of rehab, and basically my wife and I were doing our premarital counseling after we were 2 years into our marriage, and they had a struggle in their life as well. And he just said, it's all worth it if I get to use this for His glory. Right. We don't become restored just to be, set on a mantle to be looked at. Right. We become restored to be used and to further that. And I think that, man, everything in your life, I'm sitting here, talking with you and thinking, it's like, man, now I understand why, you are, quote unquote, the way you are, the way, you speak and the things you say and the way you pour out into people. I can see that God, from the time you went to that seminary to your marriages to now, God has formed that. God has made that for, I think, this specific purpose of being in this church. I mean, I'm sure there's other things that he wants to use you in, but as far as being involved in my life and the community of these people in this church and those around you, I mean, you, without the Reinerts in this church lacks something great. And I don't say that lightly. I say that knowing that there's plenty of people in this church that serve. There's plenty of people in this church that give of themselves. I think of, Miss Sandy, who teaches our kids, and all the kids' teachers, every week giving of themselves. But without Don and Elaine, without Don taking that restoration and saying, okay, now what can I do with that? This church isn't the same. And
you're very kind. Thank you.
Well, in the last year, I've experienced just pouring out, and you embody a love that is serving, a love that's not just words. And the way we learn, the way we see what's best for us, I think is by example, by somebody doing that, before us. That's, part of the reason we go to church and we listen to a pastor speak and, in the pulpit is because we want the wisdom that God's given them to be imparted upon us. Well, we fail to realize that as people, as believers, we have wisdom to give others, and we have love and a message of the gospel to give others through our service, through our love.
Well, the other thing I've learned is that, the Bible talks about us being lively stones. Mm. It does not say we're lively bricks. Yeah. Now, I had the pleasure of actually going over to England and seeing some of the old castles and some of the walls they built around some of the castles. Mm-hmm. And when you go there, you look at them, and there is not one stone that copies and is a duplicate of another. Mm. Every one is completely unique. And I think that in capturing the scriptures, I think God was very careful in giving that understanding that it's stones and it's not bricks.
Mm-hmm.
Bricks are uniform.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We're not. Every one of us has a different walk. Every one of us have got different experiences. God uses that uniqueness so that somebody that needs to hear Don Reinert's approach and the experiences that I've experienced and needs to hear that as an encouragement is going to be somebody completely different than's going to use something that Jake's going to say.
For sure.
And I think God is just a master orchestrator that knows how to pull it all together and knows how to take all kinds of different people from different backgrounds, different looks, different ages, everything. And he puts it all together in a way that when it's all said and done, the picture that he paints or the symphony music that he creates is just incredible. And only he can do it.
Amen to that.
I agree. And I just want to add a couple things just from hearing because I've gone to FCF with Don for a while now, and just hearing the story, there's power in it. It's like, oh, you look at the Reinerts and like, oh, they just seem perfect. They love each other. They're so great. But hearing the backstory and the chapters that God has written into your life, it just shows that there's hope. And that not everybody's perfect, and you got to go through stuff to get where you are. You weren't always, you didn't, obviously, because what you shared with, your prior marriages and all that stuff. It's just for the people listening. There's power in that, and just knowing like, oh, like don't give up, because a lot of people, and I've been there. It's like, just because you're going through something doesn't mean that you have to stop and it's not real. It's like seeing what the outcome, and obviously you guys go through stuff and you're not perfect and all that, but it's realizing it, and it's just the pour out of the community and the love. It's there, like Paul was saying. It's awesome to hear. It's very, very encouraging for sure.
Absolutely.
What's funny with you look in the Bible and some of the characters in there, David is one that I really relate to a lot. But David is a man that after he had the affair with Bathsheba and after he killed her husband or had her husband killed, he repented. But after that is when God said that David was a man after God's own heart.
Yeah.
So, if our salvation was based upon our ability to do it, we'd all be in serious trouble.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But fortunately, it's not. We truly rely upon him. He can do what only he can do, and we can't do it.
Yep.
If we were able to do it, he would not have had to have come to earth and die for us.
Yep.
He paid the price for us because he knew that we were unable to.
Amen.
And, you end up living a life of just gratitude because of that.
Amen. Well, Don, I thank you for coming to talk with us today.
We
could go on and on and on and on because I love to hear your stories, and I love...
And the tone of your voice, by the way.
I know.
I'm sure y'all are loving it.
I know. I'm kind of like, well, I wish I sounded like Don.
I thought Paul had a radio voice. Don reads our scriptures sometimes during service, and everyone's like, where's that voice coming from?
Can we record Don reading
That's
the
great.
Bible?
A lot of people thought it was a recording, and then they come and they're like, oh my gosh, you're the voice.
Well, Don, again, thank you. I
you.
hope, guys, that this encourages you. I hope that you know that if you're struggling, that if you're going through something, there is restoration there. And that when we're restored, it gives us a power greater than ourselves to love others, to help them be restored as well. So check us out on ironandanchor.com. Check us out on YouTube, social media, and listen to us on all your podcast favorite apps. And subscribe, rate us so we can get to more people. And you guys have a good Friday. Hey guys, this is Paul from Iron and Anchor. If you're feeling led that you might want to be a part of the podcast, go to ironandanchor.com and to the Contact Us section. The form that we send out to people for the episodes, it's going to be on there. Fill it out and we'll be in touch. Thanks.